Hi, so we're going to learn to crochet. So we've got our ball of yarn and our crochet hook. So this is Helter Skelter Chunky, which is 100% acrylic. It's got 125 meters in a ball, and it will use 5 to 6 millimeter needles or hook. That's the knitting tension, not crochet tension. How to care for it. This is the shade name. And the dye lot. The dye lot's very handy if you're making something with more than one ball. You want that dye lot to match, otherwise different dye lots might be different, slightly different colours. So we're going to start crocheting. So let's take the ball band off and start off with a slip knot. So I am right-handed. Where's the end of this yarn? I'm right-handed. The left-handed crochet is hard for me to show you because I'm not very good with my left hand. It's exactly the same, you just have everything swapped around. So a slip knot, that's how we get started. So crochet is easier to get to grips with because you only have one stitch and one hook to worry about at once. So to make a slip knot, make a loop in the yarn and then pick up the yarn through the loop. So it's basically just a normal knot, but you're putting one loop of it through. So you then should be able to tighten that up to the hook like that, but don't make it too tight. Beginner crocheters do tend to be tight, and try not to be too tight because it'll make everything harder. So I am going to hold it like this. Everyone has their own way of doing it, but you like to hold what will become the work, but is not yet because we haven't started, and keep the working yarn that's attached to the ball tense by holding it between my little finger and my ring finger, and then spread it out. That means that it's there when I need it. So the first thing we're going to do is chain, and I would recommend continuing to chain until you are totally comfortable with it. Don't move on to the stitches until you're chaining like a champion, because that will get you into the swing of it. Then everything else will be really easy. So make yards and yards of chain. You can always pull it out. It's not a waste of wool. So to chain, all you're doing is pulling a loop through. Now this is why you don't want to pull this too tight, because if it's too tight, you won't be able to get that chain through. So if you pull up on the hook, it should pull that wool through from the working yarn. So if you're really tight here, you won't be able to pull anything through there, but you can just pull up slightly and that'll loosen it off. So when you pull, so I like to have normally hold the work. At the moment we've got one chain and that's it. And then I put the yarn, kind of clamp the yarn there, but not too tightly, you want it to run through, and then hold it out with this finger so that it's presented nicely, just ready for me to catch with the needle, with the hook, sorry, and pull it through. Now when I pull it through, I tend to pull it through with the hook pointing underneath. That way, for a start, you're pulling up slightly, which opens the loop out, but also you're not trying to catch. If you try and pull it up here, then you're not going to pull it through. So twist it round and pull it through that bit. So you can see now I've done 1, 2, 3, 4 chains. So just pull a loop through. I know, I'm making it look very easy. You're probably sitting there, fingers and thumbs, but it does get easy. So this, learning how to hold the wool in whatever way, some people hold the crochet hook like this, some people hold it like this. It's entirely up to you. You just need to find a way that feels comfortable to you. As with a lot of things, the more you have underneath to hold on to, the easier it gets. So keep chaining until you're completely comfortable with chaining, and do not make it too tight. The reason being, the next stage, we're going to go into here, and if that is super tight, you won't be able to get your hook into it. So keep everything loose. Don't pull too tight on this yarn up here, because that will tighten up this loop on your hook. Keep everything nice and loose, and just chain, chain, chain. So once you're a chaining champion, then let's move on to the most basic crochet stitch that we call a double crochet. If you're in America, you'll call it a single crochet. So watch out on knitting patterns which terminology people are using. Now, we've got that first chain on the hook, we've got the next one, and we're going to go into the third one. The reason for that is, if you try and go into that one, your edges are going to bunch up. So you can crochet round and round in a spiral, or you can crochet backwards and forwards to make a flat object, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go into that third chain from the hook, going to put our hook into it, and we're going to pull a loop through, as if we were chaining, but we've gone into there. So we've now got 2 loops on the hook. The next stage is to pull a loop through both of these chains. Now, you can see why it's a lot easier if it's not too tight. If that's too tight, you're going to really struggle. So we have just completed one stitch. You can see it's got 2 little legs, a sort of slightly green one and a slightly blue one. And at the top, it looks like a chain. So you can see that those 2 little legs go into this hole here, and our next hole is going to be here. So we're going to go into there, we're going to pull 1 loop through, so that we've got 2 loops on the hook, and then we're going to go and pull a loop through both of the loops on the hook. So we've now done 2 stitches, so you can see there's 2 chains on the top, 2 little sets of V's into these 2 stitches here. Now, some people will say, you have to go into this part of the chain or this part of the chain. Go into whichever part of the stitch is comfortable for you, because I like, personally, going into the top loop of the chain. It's there, it's easy and it's convenient, and I find the bottom edge looks perfectly fine when you do that. So go for whatever works. So we're going to do a double crochet stitch into each of these little chains all the way down. So if you're not sure, look at the last stitch you did, sitting in that loop, and look for the next loop. There we go. If you go into the same loop twice, that's an increase. Handy for all sorts of things. If you miss one, that's a decrease. So this is double crochet, and it's a very, very useful stitch and the most basic. And if you get the hang of doing this, then all the other stitches are just variations on this. So for trebles, you'll wrap the yarn around your hook before you go in, and you'll make a taller stitch. For slip stitch crochet, then you won't go in at all, but it's all basically the same idea. So we've reached the end of our row, back to the start of our chain. And we're going to turn the yarn around, the working. You see now it's easier, you've got something to hold on to. And if you hold on just under the stitch, then you can lift that stitch up, which makes it much easier to get the loops through. I just lost it. So at the end of the row, turn, and we're going to work another row back the way. Things will probably be quite curly, corkscrewy, don't worry about that, it'll flatten out the more you've got. What we're going to do next is called a turning chain. See, if we go straight and start crocheting into these stitches here, then we won't have enough room and we'll get a bunched up edge. So we're going to do 1 chain, and that gives us enough room. So our first stitch that we want to go into is here. Now, when we go into the stitches rather than the foundation chain, we're actually going under the V of the chain, which means it looks like you've got 2 stitches. So we're going to pull a loop through that, and now we're back to having 2 like we were before. So going under the V like that and pulling a loop through just as we were before. So the only difference that we're not going into the foundation chain, we're going into the stitches. So you can see this is our last stitch, the V sitting in this hole here, which means our next stitch is going to go into here. So it's always worth just stopping and checking that you're not going into the same stitch twice or missing ones. And when you go into that hole, you're actually going under 2 parts of that little V chain. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So I'm going to continue like this. You can actually work crochet really quite fast. I find it a lot faster than knitting for making flat objects like this. And yes, it's curling round like a nice little ram's horn. Don't worry about that. Can't do that when it's a big square. So when you get to the end, make sure that you go into this last stitch there, because that's really easy to miss and something that I'm very prone to. Suddenly you've got fewer stitches than when you started. So again, we're going to turn our work. So we're working back the way for our next row, and we're going to do a turning chain, and then we're going to go off. So depending on what you want to make, you can then make, well, now we can make a rectangle. So if we want to make something like a scarf, we would just keep going until you got very, very bored. I prefer a cowl, where you would keep going until it fits comfortably around your neck, and then you would seam the 2 ends. When you want to finish, all we need to do is pull the last loop nice and big and feed the end of the yarn through that last loop. Now obviously this is still attached to the ball and I don't want to cut it off, but pretend it isn't. So then pull that tight, and there you go. That's all you do to finish off. So no complicated casting off or casting on with crochet, just why it's nice and easy to get the hang of. So again, I like to hold the work with my thumb and forefinger, and then I like to wrap the yarn around my little finger and hold it there, so that this is presented nice and stable, so I can just loop it like that. If it's dangling down and you're trying to catch it and pull it through, then it gets quite tricky. Learning how to hold it in whatever way you're comfortable with is really handy. If you're left-handed, deep breath. Right, if you're left-handed, we're going to hold. Okay, right, we can do this. Okay, so we're going to go in, grab a loop. Am I going to manage this? Go in, grab another loop, and pull it through. Hooray! Success. So, if you're left-handed, you're just doing the same, but with the yarn and the hook in the opposite hands. And there we go. Keep going, make dishcloths that are square, fingerless mitts. You can make a rectangle and sew them up here so that your thumb can stick out. All sorts of things you can do with rectangles. You can go round and round into circles and tubes. And then there's lots of other stitches to learn, like trebles and V-stitches and popcorn stitches. But that's the basics. Once you're comfortable with that, you're good to go. So, best of luck.